One of our largest and most diverse families in Wisconsin is the rose family. This one's nice and easy to remember the name for. The genus for roses is called Rosa, R-O-S-A. And so that gives you the name Rosaceae, the rose family. And even in Wisconsin, there's a lot of diversity. So we have herbaceous and woody members. We've got this herbaceous strawberry here, woody shrub of spirea, and a woody tree of the black cherry prunus. One thing that can be helpful to tell these different members of Rosaceae to identify them is the serrate leaf margin. So serrate, finely toothed sometimes, deeply toothed in other cases, and pretty reliable. I don't know of any cases that have strictly entire margins. So even in the cherry here, prunus, it might look kind of entire from a distance, but when you get in there, you'll notice the serrations and help you to put this into family. The presence of stipules is also pretty helpful. So sometimes rather extravagant stipules, these big flared out paired stipules at the base of this leaf. And the stipules also help us to remember that this is a compound leaf. You can see those leaflets are divided all the way down to their bases. So 1, 2, 3 leaflets, trifoliolate. Here's an entire, sorry, not entire, a simple leaf that's not compound in prunus. And then 1, 2, 3, 7 parted leaf, another member of the genus Potentilla. And floral formula for this group, also pretty helpful, at least when it comes to number of petals. We'll see lots of variation. As a big family, it's hard to state universally about some of the features in this family, but the 5 petals are very helpful. So 5 sepals, 5 petals. And then here, lots of stamens. This is a helpful one. We'll see a couple plant families, as I will highlight, that have this lots of stamens feature. And then the gynoecium might be helpful to learn these kind of one group at a time. So sometimes they are a single carpel. We'll have a few cases of that. Sometimes up to a whole bunch of carpels. So what are we going on here? Here's an example of how these carpels might be differentiated a little differently. In the rubus, this is the blackberries or the raspberries genus. We've got a flower here. You can see lots of separate stigmas there, kind of mealy stuff in the middle of this flower. So lots of stamens toward the outside, that's universal across the family. And then also lots of stigmas. So lots of stigmas tells you you've got lots of separate carpels. These are separate stigmas with also separate styles, just kind of crammed together. And you can really appreciate that once they're going to fruit. So the petals have fallen off, these sepals are sticking around, 5 sepals behind, the stamens are wilted, the styles are even browning, and they're gonna fall off or diminish. And then the green bits here, these are the ovaries of those separate carpels that are going to develop into fleshy drupelets in this case. So lots of separate carpels in a superior ovary. The rose is kind of a wacky case. So the rose has some flower fusion where it has the sepal, petal, and stamen all fused together into this cup here called a hypanthium. So if you want to write that down, hypanthium is the fused sepals, petals, stamens, all fused together, and sometimes serving as this kind of cup around the female organs, the gynoecium. So what's interesting about rose flowers is that they look inferior, but they're just sort of ovaries existing in this space, which is this hypanthium cup. And you'll notice that they're not fused to the hypanthium. The hypanthium is open at this base. These are the carpels with their ovaries here, and then long independent styles. So the styles still exist. They're separate from the hypanthium, so they're not fused to it. And the styles go up and become stigmas farther up. This is where they would be able to grab the pollen from pollinators. And as we'll see, this also contributes to an interesting fruit type in roses. So here's one way to think about our single carpel flowers. Here, single carpel flowers exist as superior ovaries. Here's another case of the hypanthium. So you can see the fusion here, petals fused stamens fused all to this cup. There's sort of a top of a cup here, sort of green beneath. You can see the sepal even here. Sepals are kind of small, little pointy green bits. So sepals, petals, stamens, all fused together into this cup, and you can actually look down this flower and see the ovary also not fused. So superior ovary not fused to any of the perianth or hypanthium, style, stigma. And in this case, the genus Prunus, the cherries and relatives, they have just one carpel. So helpful to identify them that way. Geum is like the blackberry that we saw before, where it has separate carpels, so lots of separate carpels. So if the ovary is superior, single carpel, gynoecium, or apocarpus. And then an example here, we saw roses. Here's your, sorry, I don't know if that's trying to be a rose or a cherry. One of the problems with emoji, right? Not enough stamens either. The fruit type, so if we have these separate carpels, we often develop into lots of different kinds of apocarpous fruits. So these would be aggregate fruits, and the fruitlets are in a variety of kinds. We've got achenes here with a little hook on them in the genus Geum. We've got some achenes, again, kind of in a cup in this genus Drimacalus. So this is like a cup of sepals. It's, again, not fused. But it's almost serving a function like it were a capsule, but it's not. It's a cup of sepals with achenes on the inside, not just straight seeds. And then here we got some black raspberry rubus, pretty common one if you know where to look in the summer. So achene fruit type, or sorry, aggregate fruits developing from these separate carpels. And then if you've got a fleshy fruit, there's a wide variety of crazy strategies going on here. And if you understand how they're put together, it makes a little more sense. So lots of these are coming from those aggregate fruit types, and they've got some fleshy components. Sometimes the flesh is accessory tissue. So going back to the rose example, I showed you how the rose had these ovaries inside of the hypanthium, and they develop into achenes. So that's the fruit type, an aggregate of achenes. So what's this big red fleshy thing? That is the fleshy hypanthium. So the hypanthium developing into fleshy tissue, that is a kind of accessory tissue, as is the apples and pears. Those are in the same fruit type here. Here's an illustration on the right. They have a lot of hypanthium tissue that's also contributing to the edible parts of apples and pears. So there's sort of a gynoecium proper in this area, kind of the core of your apple or your pear. And then the flesh toward the outside is actually fleshy hypanthium. So fleshy hypanthium here, fleshy hypanthium here. This one, this genus Amelanchier, has fruits that are very much like apples. Sorbus, kind of the same thing. So these are, this one's edible for people. I don't know, don't have any personal experience with sorbus. Then one other example, I guess a couple others. One more, as we're talking about the accessory fruit type. We talked about this in fruit types before, how a strawberry is put together is it actually wears these achenes on the outside of its fruit. So that tells you that something weird is going on, that it looks like you got seeds on the outside of a fruit. Developmentally, that doesn't happen. And technically, the seed is contained within this pericarp on each of these outer dots. And the flesh of this one comes from the receptacle, as it said. So the attachment point for those ovaries becomes the fleshy, tasty part of a strawberry. A little bit worth noting, this genus Prunus, there's a whole type of group of plants in Rosaceae that belong to this genus or this fruit type, flower type. And that was the single carpel flower developing into a drupe. So lots of economically important drupes, including peaches, plums, apricots, nectarines. And then interestingly, so this is one of our native plants. This is the black cherry. It's kind of a wild version of cherry. This is the cherry you can buy in the store. And then one little exceptional case here is the almond, which starts off as, it's kind of a drupe, but what would normally be the fleshy part dries and falls off. And what's left is the pit. So when you eat an almond, you're eating the seed inside of a pit. If you ever get shelled, unshelled almonds, you'll basically be getting the pit that you can crack open. And the structure of this with this kind of porous outer, it tells you a little bit about the fact that that was interior to other parts of that fruit. All right, lots and lots and lots of different kinds. We'll go over some of them. So they're herbaceous plants, also shrubs, also trees. Here are some the noteworthy ones you can find in the state. Serviceberry, hawthorn, apple, cherry, rose, blackberry. Some edible, some not. Good ones to eat if you know which ones to find. All right, so that was kind of the overview of the woody ones. Here's some examples of woody plants. We have both trees and shrubs. Herbaceous plants, also a whole bunch of herbaceous Rosaceae plants, wild strawberries, this genus called Avens, Geum, cinquefoil, potentilla, and then just all of these. There's lots more besides what I can just put on these slides for you. And then global economic importance are lots of ornamental flowers that you can put in your yard, and then also some edible ones. So apples, pears, strawberries, cherries, plums, raspberries, and so on.